The sun had just begun to set over the vast prairie when Quentin Foster knelt at his brother's grave, his hat clutched to his chest, and his eyes closed in silent prayer. The small wooden cross bore the name William Foster, along with the dates 1855–1881, a painful reminder of what Quentin had lost just 3 months prior. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the small cemetery on the outskirts of Redemption Springs, Colorado. The year was 1881, and the West was still as wild as the rumors that traveled east. "I miss you, Will," Quentin whispered, his voice carried away by the wind. "I swear I'll find the men who did this to you." Lost in his grief, he hadn't noticed the woman who stood a few yards away, clutching a bundle of wildflowers. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and her simple calico dress moved gently in the breeze. "You're not the only one talking to heaven," she said softly, her voice startling him from his reverie. Quentin rose quickly, dusting off his worn denim pants as he turned to face her. Her eyes, the color of stormy skies, met his, and he noticed the grief etched into her face. "Miss, I didn't realize anyone else was here," he said, placing his hat back atop his head. "Jessamine Reed," she offered, stepping closer to a nearby grave. "But most folks just call me Jess." Quentin watched as she laid the wildflowers on a grave marked with a cross similar to Will's. The dates were the same as his brother's. "Quentin Foster," he replied, his curiosity piqued. "Was that someone close to you?" She nodded, a sad smile gracing her lips. "My brother, James. He was killed in the bank robbery 3 months ago." Quentin's heart skipped a beat. "My brother, Will, he was the deputy who tried to stop it," she finished for him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "They said he fought bravely." "They both did, from what I heard," Quentin said, his voice thick with emotion. He studied her face, wondering how he hadn't crossed paths with her before. He'd been in Redemption Springs for nearly 2 months, searching for any clues about the gang that had robbed the bank and killed his brother. "You're not from around here," she observed, her gaze taking in his trail-worn clothes and the 6-shooter at his hip. "No, madam. I was working cattle down in Texas when I got word about Will." He looked back at his brother's grave. "Left everything behind to come here, to grieve?" She asked, though her eyes suggested she knew there was more to it. "To find justice," he answered honestly. "The men who did this are still out there." Jessamine's expression hardened. "The Blackburn Gang, they've been terrorizing towns all through Colorado for the past year." Quentin nodded. "That's what the sheriff told me. Said there wasn't much hope of finding them, though." "Sheriff Davis isn't known for his ambition," she said with a hint of bitterness. "He's content to let things be, so long as the trouble stays away from Redemption Springs." The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains now, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Quentin realized they would soon be standing in darkness. "May I walk you back to town, Miss Reed? It'll be dark soon." She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Foster. That would be kind." As they walked the dirt path leading back to town, Quentin couldn't help but notice the determined set of her jaw, reminiscent of his brother's stubborn expression when faced with a challenge. "If you don't mind my asking, what did your brother do in town?" he inquired. "James was a schoolteacher," she said, pride evident in her voice. "He loved this town, loved teaching the children. He was in the bank that day to deposit the money he'd raised for new books." "I'm sorry," Quentin said, meaning it. "Seems like he was a good man." "The best," she agreed. "What about your brother?" "Will was always the responsible one," Quentin said with a sad smile. "I was wild, always looking for adventure. He put down roots, became a lawman, wrote to me about this place like it was heaven on earth." They reached the edge of town, where lamplight spilled from windows and the sounds of piano music drifted from the saloon. "Where are you staying?" she asked. "Got a room above the livery," he replied. "And you?" "I have a small house on Cedar Street. I teach at the school now," took over after James. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Foster, I've heard rumors that you've been asking questions about the Blackburn Gang." Quentin nodded cautiously. "I have. I want to help," she said firmly. "My brother deserves justice as much as yours does." Her directness surprised him. Most women he'd known wouldn't involve themselves in such dangerous matters. "With all due respect, Miss Reed, hunting outlaws is no job for a lady." The fire that flashed in her eyes told him immediately he'd said the wrong thing. "My father was a frontiersman, Mr. Foster. I can ride, shoot, and track as well as any man," she said, her voice cool but determined. "And more importantly, I know this area. I've lived here my whole life." Quentin studied her face in the fading light, seeing the determination there. He thought of Will, of how his brother had always told him he was too stubborn for his own good. Perhaps this Jessamine Reed was cut from the same cloth. "Meet me for breakfast at the hotel restaurant tomorrow," he finally said. 7 o'clock, we can talk more then." A small smile curved her lips. 7 it is, Mr. Foster." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Mr. Foster, don't be late." As she walked away, Quentin couldn't help but feel that his quest for justice had just taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a solitary mission now included this schoolteacher with stormy eyes and a spine of steel. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of crisp autumn day that made the mountains seem closer than they were. Quentin arrived at the hotel restaurant at 6:45, choosing a table near the window where he could watch the street. He'd slept fitfully, dreams of Will's death mingling with the image of Jessamine Reed standing among the gravestones. At precisely 7 o'clock, she walked through the door. She'd exchanged yesterday's calico for a practical dark blue dress, her hair neatly braided and pinned up. Several patrons nodded to her respectfully as she passed, and Quentin realized she must be well regarded in town. "Good morning, Mr. Foster," she said, taking the seat across from him. "Miss Reed," he replied with a nod. "I took the liberty of ordering coffee." "Thank you." She removed her gloves and placed them neatly beside her plate. "I appreciate your punctuality." "My brother always said being late was a sign of disrespect," he said, pouring her a cup from the pot on the table. "Your brother was right." She took a sip of the coffee, then set the cup down deliberately. "Now, tell me what you know about the men who killed our brothers." Quentin glanced around the restaurant, making sure no one was within earshot. "Not much, I'm afraid. The Blackburn Gang has hit 6 banks in the territory over the past year. They're led by a man named Ezekiel Blackburn, former Confederate officer turned outlaw. Travels with 5 or 6 men, all armed and dangerous." "I know they came from the north," Jessamine added, leaning forward slightly. "James mentioned seeing them ride in from that direction the morning of the robbery." Quentin's interest was piqued. The sheriff never mentioned that. "Sheriff Davis didn't ask many questions," she said with a frown. "He was more concerned with burying the dead and calming the town than pursuing the killers." The waitress arrived with plates of eggs and bacon, interrupting their conversation momentarily. When she left, Quentin continued in a lower voice. "I've been thinking of heading north, checking the mining camps and small settlements. Outlaws need supplies, and they tend to spend money freely when they have it." Jessamine nodded thoughtfully. "There's an old trapper named Elijah who lives in the foothills north of here. He knows every trail and hideout in these mountains. If anyone's seen strangers passing through, it would be him." "You know him?" Quentin asked, impressed with her local knowledge. He taught James and me how to track when we were children, she explained. Our father died when we were young, and Elijah was something of a mentor to us. Quentin considered this information. Having a guide who knew the territory would be invaluable. How far is his cabin? A day's ride, she answered promptly. We could leave tomorrow morning, be there by nightfall. Quentin raised an eyebrow. Miss Reed, I appreciate your help, but Mr. Foster, she interrupted firmly. Elijah won't speak to strangers. He's a hermit who values his privacy above all else. The only reason he'll talk to you is if I bring you. Quentin sighed, recognizing the logic in her argument even as he worried about the propriety and danger of traveling with a woman. What about your teaching duties? School's not in session until next week, she replied. I have time. He studied her determined expression, so at odds with her delicate features. There was steel beneath that proper exterior, and he found himself both concerned and intrigued by it. All right, he conceded. But we travel light and fast, and if there's any sign of trouble, you head back to town. She offered him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course, Mr. Foster. Something told him she had no intention of following that particular instruction, but he chose not to press the matter for now. Meet me at the livery at dawn, he said. Bring only what you need for a few days' journey. I'll be there. She stood, replacing her gloves with practiced grace. And Mr. Foster, bring extra ammunition. Elijah always says it's better to have it and not need it. With that, she left him to finish his breakfast alone, the townspeople watching curiously as she departed. Quentin had the distinct feeling that his quest had just become more complicated and perhaps more interesting than he had anticipated. That evening, Quentin checked and rechecked his gear, making sure everything was in order for their journey. His stallion, a sturdy bay named Thunder, was well rested and fed. He'd purchased supplies from the general store: coffee, beans, salt pork, and ammunition for both his revolver and the Winchester rifle he carried in his saddle scabbard. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Jessamine Reed. There was something about her that unsettled him, not in an unpleasant way, but in a manner that made him more aware of himself than he'd been in years. Perhaps it was the shared grief, or maybe it was the quiet strength she exhibited despite her loss. Either way, he found himself looking forward to their journey with mixed feelings of anticipation and concern. The dawn broke crisp and clear, with a thin layer of frost covering the ground. Quentin was already at the livery when Jessamine arrived, riding a sleek chestnut mare and dressed in a manner that surprised him. Gone was the schoolteacher in her proper dress. Instead, she wore split riding skirts, a sturdy jacket, and boots. A wide-brimmed hat protected her face from the sun, and her hair was braided and pinned up practically. "Good morning," she greeted him, dismounting with ease. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all," he replied, unable to hide his surprise at her attire. She noticed his expression and smiled slightly. "Did you expect me to ride side saddle in a full skirt, Mr. Foster?" He felt his face warm slightly. "I suppose I didn't think it through." "Clearly," she said, but there was no malice in her tone. "Shall we be off? We've got a long ride ahead." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, taking a trail that led north out of town. The path wound through rolling grasslands before beginning to climb into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Quentin let Jessamine lead, as she knew the way to Elijah's cabin. For the first hour they rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Quentin's curiosity got the better of him. "How long have you been teaching?" he asked, bringing Thunder alongside her mare. "Officially 3 months," she answered, adjusting her hat against the morning sun. "Unofficially, I've been helping James with his classes for years, The school board was kind enough to offer me his position after. She paused, then continued with forced brightness. What about you? What did you do in Texas? I've been a ranch hand since I was 16, he said. Worked my way up to foreman at the Triple R near San Antonio. That's quite an accomplishment for someone so young, she observed. Quentin chuckled. I'm 30, Miss Reed. Not exactly a spring chicken. She glanced at him with surprise. You don't look it. Life outdoors keeps a man young, he said with a shrug. Or so my mother used to say. And your parents, are they still in Texas? Quentin's expression sobered. No, they passed when I was 20. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Will was already up here by then, wearing a badge and making something of himself. I'm sorry, she said softly. It seems we have more in common than just our brothers. Your parents? He asked gently. Mother died birthing me, she said matter-of-factly. Father was killed by a grizzly when I was 12. It's been just James and me since then. Her voice caught slightly on her brother's name. Quentin nodded, understanding the pain of being truly alone in the world. It's hard, losing the last of your family. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt as though she could see straight through to his soul. Yes, she agreed. It leaves a hollow place inside you that nothing seems to fill. They continued riding, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. The beauty of the Colorado landscape, tales of Quentin's cattle drives, Jessamine's stories of teaching stubborn children their letters. By midday, when they stopped to rest the horses by a small stream, Quentin realized he was enjoying her company far more than he had expected to. As she knelt by the stream to refill their canteens, he found himself watching the sunlight play across her features. There was a natural grace to her movements, a quiet confidence that spoke of a woman comfortable in her own skin. Mr. Foster, she said without looking up, it's impolite to stare. Caught, Quentin cleared his throat awkwardly. My apologies, Miss Reed. I was just thinking that you don't seem much like any schoolteacher I've ever known. Rising with the filled canteens, she handed one to him with an amused expression. And how many school teachers have you known, Mr. Foster? Fair point, he admitted with a smile. Just the one who taught me my letters back in Texas. Mrs. Gunderson, terrifying woman with spectacles and a ruler she wasn't afraid to use. Jessamine laughed, a clear sound that seemed to brighten the day. I prefer not to rule by fear, though I do keep a ruler on my desk just in case. They remounted and continued their journey, the trail growing steeper as they ascended into the mountains. The pines grew thicker, and the air took on the sharp scent of evergreen and snow from the higher elevations. By late afternoon, the sky had begun to darken, not with approaching night but with storm clouds building over the peaks. How much farther to Elijah's cabin? Quentin asked, eyeing the threatening sky. Another hour, perhaps less if we hurry, Jessamine replied, her expression concerned. Mountain storms can be fierce this time of year. They urged their horses to a faster pace, the animals sensing the changing weather and responding eagerly. The first fat raindrops began to fall just as a small cabin came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping and surrounded by tall pines. There, Jessamine pointed. That's Elijah's place. They had barely reached the small clearing when the skies opened up, rain pouring down in sheets. A figure appeared at the cabin door, shotgun in hand, watching their approach warily. Elijah. Jessamine called out, raising her voice to be heard above the storm. It's Jessamine Reed. The figure lowered the shotgun slightly but didn't move from the doorway. As they drew closer, Quentin could make out an older man with a wild gray beard and piercing blue eyes set in a weathered face. Jess, the man called back, squinting through the rain. What in tarnation are you doing up here in this weather? They reached the cabin and quickly dismounted, leading their horses to a lean-to shelter attached to the side of the cabin. "We need to talk to you," Jessamine explained, hurrying toward the door. "It's important." Elijah grunted, stepping back to allow them entrance. "Get in here before you drown, both of you." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly neat and warm, with a fire crackling in a stone fireplace. Animal pelts covered the floor and various tools of the trapper's trade hung from the walls. The smell of cooking stew filled the small space. "This is Quentin Foster," Jessamine said, removing her dripping hat and jacket. "Will Foster's brother." Recognition flickered across Elijah's face. "The deputy who was killed. Heard about that. Bad business." He turned his sharp gaze on Quentin. "You've come a long way for answers, I reckon." "Yes, sir," Quentin replied, hanging his wet coat near the fire. "I'm tracking the men who killed my brother." Elijah gestured to a rough-hewn table with 3 chairs. "Sit. Dry yourselves. Storm's not letting up any time soon, and this isn't a conversation to have on an empty stomach." As they ate Elijah's surprisingly tasty rabbit stew, Quentin explained what little he knew about the Blackburn Gang and their string of robberies. The old trapper listened silently, his weathered face giving away nothing. "So," Quentin concluded, "Miss Reed thought you might have seen something." "Strangers passing through, maybe, or heard rumors of where they might be hiding." Elijah's eyes flicked to Jessamine, then back to Quentin. "I might have," he said cautiously. "Question is, what do you plan to do with that information?" "Find them," Quentin said simply. "Bring them to justice." "Justice?" Elijah repeated, the word sounding hollow in the small cabin. "You mean hang them?" "I mean see them stand trial for what they've done," Quentin clarified. "Though I won't deny I'd prefer to see them at the end of a rope." Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying Quentin intently. "And if they don't come peaceful-like, you prepared to kill them, if necessary," Quentin admitted. "But that's not my first choice." The old trapper nodded slowly, as if Quentin had passed some unspoken test. "About 2 months back, a group of 6 men came through these parts. Didn't stop to chat, but they were heading west, toward the old mining country. One of them had a fancy silver-plated revolver, like he wanted to be noticed." Jessamine leaned forward eagerly. "That matches the description of Ezekiel Blackburn. The bank teller said he had silver pistols." "Could be," Elijah agreed. "Few weeks later, I was trading furs in Silver Creek, about 30 miles northwest of here. Heard talk of some new fellas throwing money around at the saloon there, paying with brand new double eagles, same as were stolen from your bank." Quentin felt a surge of hope, the first real lead he'd had since arriving in Colorado. "You think they might be using Silver Creek as a base?" Elijah shrugged. "Maybe. Or they could just be passing through, but it's a good place to start looking. Town's grown since they found a new silver vein last year. Lots of strangers coming and going. Easy place to blend in." Outside, thunder crashed and the rain continued to pour down. Elijah glanced toward the window. "You two won't be going anywhere tonight." "Storm like this, trails turn to mud slicks, dangerous in the dark." "We wouldn't want to impose," Quentin began, but Elijah waved him off. "Jess is like family," the old man said gruffly. "Any friend of hers is welcome under my roof. I'll sleep in the lean-to with the horses." "You two can have the cabin." "Absolutely not," Jessamine protested. "We couldn't put you out of your own home." "Ain't putting me out," Elijah insisted. "Sleep out there half the time anyway." He stood, gathering their empty bowls. "Got some things to tend to before turning in. You two get some rest." After he left, an awkward silence fell between Quentin and Jessamine. The propriety of their situation wasn't lost on either of them. "I'll sleep by the fire," Quentin offered, breaking the silence. "You take the bed." Jessamine nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Foster." I think, given the circumstances, you might call me Quentin, he suggested with a small smile. She returned the smile, and something in her eyes made his heart beat a little faster. Then you must call me Jessamine, or Jess if you prefer. Jessamine, he said, testing the name on his tongue. It suits you. Later, as Quentin stretched out on a bedroll near the fire and Jessamine slept in Elijah's narrow bed, he found himself thinking not of the Blackburn Gang, but of the woman whose quiet breathing filled the cabin. There was something about her that called to him, something beyond their shared grief and quest for justice. With the rain pattering on the roof and the fire crackling beside him, Quentin finally drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled not with revenge, but with stormy gray eyes and a laugh that seemed to brighten the darkest day. Morning broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Quentin woke to find Elijah already returned to the cabin, cooking breakfast over the fire while Jessamine folded the bedding. "Good morning," she greeted him, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way he hadn't seen before. It softened her features, making her look younger and more vulnerable. "Morning," he replied, sitting up and running a hand through his own rumpled hair. "Sleep well. Better than I expected," she admitted. "Elijah says the trails should be passable by mid-morning." They ate a hearty breakfast of flapjacks and coffee, during which Elijah provided detailed directions to Silver Creek and advice on the best approach to take. "Town's grown rough," the old trapper warned. "Miners, gamblers, and worse. You'd be wise to be careful who you ask questions of." "We will," Quentin assured him, though he was more concerned about Jessamine's safety than his own. As they prepared to leave, Elijah pulled Quentin aside while Jessamine readied the horses. "That girl is special," the old man said in a low voice. "Known her since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. She's got more courage than most men I've met, but she's hurting bad over her brother. Watch out for her." "I will," Quentin promised, understanding the warning for what it was. "I have no intention of letting any harm come to her." Elijah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "See that you don't, and watch your own back. Blackburn's not the kind to go down easy." They set off under a sky washed clean by the storm, the mountain air crisp and invigorating. The trail was muddy in places but passable, just as Elijah had predicted. They rode at a steady pace, hoping to cover significant ground before nightfall. "How did you come to know Elijah so well?" Quentin asked as they navigated a particularly scenic stretch of trail, the mountains rising majestically around them. Jessamine smiled at the memory. "After my father died, James and I were alone. I was 12, he was 16. Elijah had been my father's friend and he checked on us regularly. Taught us how to hunt, to track, to survive." Her expression grew thoughtful. "He offered to let us live with him, but James was determined to make it on our own. He took odd jobs in town while finishing his own schooling, then became the teacher." "He sounds like a remarkable young man," Quentin observed. "He was," she agreed, her voice soft with remembrance, "always putting others before himself. The children adored him." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in memories of the brothers they had lost. Eventually, the trail broadened, allowing them to ride side by side. "What will you do?" Jessamine asked suddenly. "After you find the men who killed Will?" Quentin hadn't thought much beyond his quest for justice. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Go back to Texas, maybe." "The ranch owner said my job would be waiting if I wanted it." "Is that what you want?" she pressed. "To return to your old life?" He considered the question seriously. "I don't know. Everything feels different now that Will's gone. He was my only family." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Will you continue teaching?" She nodded. "I enjoy it more than I expected to. The children have been a comfort these past months." A smile touched her lips. "They don't allow you much time for self-pity." I can imagine, Quentin said with a chuckle. Never had much patience for book learning myself. Too restless. Not everyone is suited for the classroom, she agreed. But education comes in many forms. I'd wager you know things I could never learn from books. Their conversation continued easily throughout the day, ranging from childhood memories to favorite books, hers, and horses, his. By the time they made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow, Quentin felt as though he'd known Jessamine for years rather than days. As they sat beside the small fire, eating a simple meal of beans and bacon, Quentin found himself watching the play of firelight across her features. She'd let her hair down again, and the golden-red glow of the flames highlighted the rich brown strands. "You're staring again, Mr. Foster," she said, though her tone was teasing rather than reproachful. "Quentin," he corrected gently. "And yes, I suppose I am. My apologies." She smiled, setting aside her empty plate. "No need to apologize. I find myself looking at you too when you're not noticing." The candor of her statement surprised him. "Do you?" "Yes," she admitted, her cheeks coloring slightly. "It's strange, isn't it, how quickly we've become comfortable with each other." "Perhaps it's our shared purpose," he suggested, though he suspected it was more than that. "Perhaps," she echoed, though her expression suggested she too thought there was something deeper at work. "Or perhaps it's finding someone who understands the hollow place inside." Her words from the previous day came back to him, about the emptiness left by losing family. He nodded slowly. That could be it. She rose and moved to sit beside him on the fallen log he'd dragged near the fire. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Quentin was acutely aware of her presence beside him. "I've been thinking," she said, her gaze on the dancing flames, "about what happens after we find these men." "Justice for our brothers," he replied, though he sensed that wasn't what she meant. "Yes, but beyond that." She turned to look at him directly. "Will finding them fill that hollow place, do you think? Or will it still be there waiting for something else to fill it?" Quentin considered her question carefully. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I've been so focused on finding them, I haven't thought much beyond that moment." "I've been thinking about it constantly," she confessed. "At first, I thought justice would be enough, that seeing these men punished would somehow make James's death meaningful, I suppose. But lately, I'm not so sure." "What changed?" he asked softly. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I met you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Quentin felt his heart rate quicken as he turned to face her fully. "Jessamine," he began, not sure what he wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. "I know it's forward of me," she continued, her eyes holding his steadily despite the blush on her cheeks. "And perhaps inappropriate given our circumstances. But life is short and uncertain, as we both know too well. I didn't want to leave words unsaid that might matter later." Quentin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were slender but strong, and they curled around his with surprising certainty. "I feel it too," he admitted. "This connection between us, I've never experienced anything like it." Her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Nor have I." For a moment, they sat in silence, hands clasped, the weight of their admission settling comfortably between them. Then, with gentle deliberation, Quentin leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both question and answer. When they separated, her eyes remained closed for a heartbeat longer, as if savoring the moment. When they opened, they held a warmth that made Quentin's breath catch. "We should get some rest," he said reluctantly. "We've got a long ride tomorrow." She nodded, but neither made a move to separate. Finally, with visible effort, Jessamine rose and moved to her bedroll on the other side of the fire. "Good night, Quentin," she said softly. "Good night, Jessamine," he replied, already missing the warmth of her beside him. As he settled into his own bedroll, Quentin realized that his quest for justice had become more complicated than he ever could have imagined. Now, there was more at stake than vengeance for his brother. There was a future to consider, a future that, perhaps, included the remarkable woman sleeping across the fire from him. They reached Silver Creek just after noon the following day. The town had clearly prospered from the renewed silver mining operations. New buildings stood alongside older structures, and the main street bustled with activity. Miners, merchants, and cowboys moved about their business, while wagons loaded with supplies or ore trundled through the muddy thoroughfare. "We should stable the horses and find lodging," Quentin suggested as they rode into town. "Then we can start asking questions." Jessamine nodded in agreement, though her eyes were wary as she took in their surroundings. "There's a decent-looking hotel there," she said, indicating a two-story building with a freshly painted sign. After securing rooms at the Silver Creek Hotel, adjacent but separate, in deference to propriety, they left their horses at the livery stable and met in the hotel restaurant to plan their approach. "We need to be discreet," Quentin cautioned, keeping his voice low. "If the Blackburn Gang is still in the area, we don't want to alert them to our presence." "Agreed," Jessamine said, sipping the surprisingly good coffee the waitress had brought. "I think our best bet is to start at the saloon. If they've been spending money freely, that's where they'd be most noticeable," Quentin frowned. "I'm not comfortable with you entering a saloon, Jessamine. Places like that are no environment for a lady." She arched an eyebrow at him. "I appreciate your concern for my virtue, Quentin, but I assure you I've been in rougher places. Besides, two people asking questions separately will draw less attention than a man inquiring alone." He wanted to argue further but recognized the practicality of her suggestion. "All right, but we stay together, and at the first sign of trouble we leave." "Agreed, agreed," she said with a satisfied nod. The Silver Spur Saloon was relatively quiet in the early afternoon, with only a few patrons scattered at tables or standing at the bar. A piano player idly tapped out a tune in the corner, and a couple of saloon girls leaned against the bar, looking bored. Quentin and Jessamine entered casually, trying not to draw attention. They took a table near the back where they could observe the room while remaining somewhat inconspicuous. A bartender with an impressive mustache nodded in their direction. "What'll it be?" he asked, approaching their table. "Whiskey," Quentin replied. "And?" "The same," Jessamine said firmly. The bartender raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, returning shortly with 2 glasses of amber liquid. "New in town?" he asked conversationally as he set the drinks down. "Just passing through," Quentin said with a friendly nod. "Looking for work in the mines, possibly." "Hiring up at the North Star," the bartender offered. "Pays decent, but the work's hard." "Might look into it," Quentin said non-committally. "Place seems prosperous. Guessing the silver strike's been good for business. Can't complain," the man agreed, warming to the conversation. "Lot of miners with money to spend." Some other types, 2 gamblers, businessmen, the usual sorts that follow the money. Jessamine took a small sip of her whiskey, managing not to grimace at the burn. "I imagine you see all kinds come through," she remarked casually. The bartender gave her an appraising look, clearly trying to figure out her relationship to Quentin. "That we do, madam, some more memorable than others. My sister and I are actually looking for some acquaintances who might have passed through," Quentin improvised smoothly. "Group of men, one with silver pistols. Name of Blackburn." The bartender's expression changed subtly, becoming more guarded. Don't recall anyone by that name, he said, his tone noticeably cooler. If you'll excuse me, got other customers to tend to. As he walked away, Jessamine leaned closer to Quentin. He knows something, she whispered. Did you see how his demeanor changed? Quentin nodded, taking a measured sip of his whiskey. The question is he afraid of them or protecting them? They continued their observation of the saloon, noting who came and went, who seemed to be regulars, and any unusual interactions. After about an hour, their patience was rewarded when the bartender engaged in a whispered conversation with a burly man who had just entered. Both men glanced in their direction more than once. I believe we've been noticed, Jessamine murmured, keeping her expression neutral. Time to leave, Quentin agreed, placing coins on the table to cover their drinks. Casually, don't look back. They rose and made their way to the door, maintaining an unhurried pace despite the prickle of awareness between Quentin's shoulder blades. Once outside, they continued down the boardwalk at a measured pace. We're being followed, Jessamine said quietly, her arm linked through his as if they were merely out for a stroll. I know, Quentin replied, resisting the urge to reach for his revolver. Keep walking toward the hotel, we'll lose him there. They never made it that far. As they turned a corner onto a less populated side street, 3 men stepped out to block their path. Behind them, heavy footsteps announced the arrival of their follower from the saloon. Heard you been asking questions about Zeke Blackburn, one of the men said, his hand resting ostentatiously on the butt of his pistol. Folks around here know better than to do that. Quentin stepped slightly in front of Jessamine, his posture tense but his voice calm. We're just looking for some men who robbed a bank in Redemption Springs, killed 2 good men in the process. The apparent leader of the group, a lean man with a scar running down one cheek, smirked. That's so. Well, ain't that a shame, but you'd be wise to forget about it and move on. Some questions ain't healthy to ask in Silver Creek. Are you threatening us? Jessamine asked, her voice steady despite the danger. The scarred man's eyes flicked to her, then back to Quentin. Just offering some friendly advice, madam, for your own good. We appreciate the concern, Quentin said, his hand now hovering near his own weapon. But we'll be continuing our inquiries. The tension in the air was palpable, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice joined the confrontation. Everything all right here, folks? All heads turned to see a tall man with a silver star on his chest approaching from the direction of the main street. The would-be intimidators straightened, their hands moving away from their weapons. No trouble, Marshal, the scarred man said, his tone suddenly respectful. Just welcoming some newcomers to town. The marshal, a weather-beaten man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, looked skeptical. Is that right? He turned to Quentin and Jessamine. These men bothering you? They seemed concerned about some questions we've been asking, Quentin said carefully. About the men who robbed the bank in Redemption Springs a few months back. Something flickered in the marshal's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or concern. Why don't you 2 come with me to my office? We can discuss this matter properly. He fixed the group of men with a hard stare. And you fellows can go about your business elsewhere. The men dispersed reluctantly, the scarred one giving Quentin a look that promised future trouble. The marshal waited until they were out of earshot before speaking again. Marshal Thomas Reeves, he introduced himself, gesturing for them to accompany him. And you'd be wise to watch what questions you ask in my town, at least in public. The marshal's office was a tidy space with wanted posters lining one wall and a gun rack behind the desk. Reeves closed the door behind them and motioned for them to take seats. Now, he said, settling behind his desk, suppose you tell me who you are and what your interest is in the Blackburn Gang. Quentin introduced himself and Jessamine, explaining their personal connection to the Redemption Springs robbery and their quest for justice. The marshal listened silently, his expression giving nothing away. "I see," Reeves said when they had finished. "I'm sorry about your brothers, truly, but you're playing a dangerous game coming here like this." "Then they are here?" Jessamine asked eagerly. The marshal's mouth tightened. "They were. Come and go. Have some kind of arrangement with Luther Haynes, owns the biggest saloon in town, the Royal Flush, not the smaller place you visited. Haynes has influence here, political and otherwise. You know they're criminals and you do nothing." Quentin couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. Reeves' eyes hardened. "Watch yourself, young man. I uphold the law as best I can in a town that's growing faster than my ability to police it. Haynes has half the town council in his pocket, and the Blackburn Gang is careful to keep their criminal activities away from Silver Creek. So you let them use this place as a safe haven," Jessamine said, disapproval clear in her tone. "I bide my time," Reeves corrected her. "Gather evidence. Wait for the right moment. Blackburn travels with at least 5 men, all killers. I have myself and 1 deputy." Quentin leaned forward. "What if you had help?" The marshal studied him thoughtfully. "You offering? If it means bringing these men to justice, yes." Reeves scratched his chin contemplatively. "They're due back any day now, according to the usual pattern. They've been hitting banks and stages further west, but they always return to Silver Creek to spend their ill-gotten gains and rest up. Then we'll wait for them," Quentin decided. "And do what exactly?" the marshal asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. "The 2 of you against 6 armed outlaws. 3 with you," Jessamine pointed out. 4 with your deputy. Still poor odds," Reeves observed. "Better than we had before we walked into your office," Quentin countered. The marshal sighed heavily, looking suddenly older. "I've been waiting 2 years for enough evidence to move against them. Finally got a witness willing to testify about a stage robbery they pulled last month. Problem is, keeping him alive long enough to get a circuit judge here." "Where is this witness now?" Jessamine asked. "Holed up at my house outside of town. Deputies with him," Reeves explained. "If Blackburn gets wind of his existence before the judge arrives next week, the man's as good as dead." Quentin exchanged a glance with Jessamine. "And if Blackburn returns before the judge, then I try to keep the peace and hope they don't cause trouble," the marshal said grimly. "Or," Quentin suggested, "we set a trap." The plan they developed over the next hour was daring but not reckless. If the Blackburn Gang returned to Silver Creek before the circuit judge arrived, Marshal Reeves would inform them that he had received official word that a witness to one of their robberies was being transported to town under heavy guard. "They'll want to ambush the stagecoach," Reeves explained. "Hit it before it reaches town. But there won't be any witness on the stage," Quentin continued. "Instead, we'll be waiting for them along the road. They'll be focused on the stage, not expecting an ambush of their own. We'll need more men," Jessamine pointed out. "Even with the element of surprise, we're outnumbered. I know a few reliable townspeople who have had enough of Blackburn's influence," Reeves said thoughtfully. "Men who can handle themselves in a fight and keep their mouths shut beforehand." They spent the remainder of the day refining their plan, with the marshal identifying potential allies and the most suitable location for their ambush. By evening, they had a strategy that, while risky, gave them a fighting chance against the outlaw gang. As they left the marshal's office, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Despite the beauty of the scene, there was tension in the air between them. "You don't approve of the plan," Quentin observed as they walked toward the hotel. Jessamine was quiet for a moment before responding. "I approve of bringing these men to justice. I'm concerned about the risks. We knew it would be dangerous, he reminded her gently. Yes, but... She stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Quentin, last night changed things for me. Before, I had little to lose beyond my own life. Now. He understood immediately what she meant. Their growing feelings for each other had raised the stakes, given them both someone to lose. For me too, he admitted, taking her hand despite being in public view. But that makes it more important that we see this through, doesn't it? So we can both move forward without the shadow of the past hanging over us. She squeezed his hand, her eyes searching his face. Promise me you'll be careful. I couldn't bear to lose you too. I promise, he said solemnly. And you must promise the same. I will, she agreed. Then, with a small smile, we should probably not stand here holding hands much longer, or we'll set the town gossips talking. Quentin reluctantly released her hand, though he wished circumstances allowed him to keep her close. I'll escort you to dinner in an hour. I'd like that, she said, her smile warming him despite the evening chill. That night, after a quiet dinner at the hotel restaurant, they lingered in the small lobby, reluctant to part, despite propriety's demands. It feels strange, Jessamine confessed, being so close to finding the men responsible after all these months of grief and uncertainty. I know, Quentin agreed. Part of me can hardly believe we've come this far. She looked up at him, her expression suddenly vulnerable. Are you afraid? Of what happens tomorrow or the next day or whenever they arrive? Yes, he admitted honestly. Not of facing them, but of failing, of letting Will down. I don't think you could ever let him down, she said softly. From everything you've told me about him, I think he'd be proud of you. Proud of your determination to see justice done. Quentin felt a lump form in his throat at her words. Thank you for that. And James would be proud of you too, I'm certain. They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet intimacy of shared understanding enveloping them. Finally, with clear reluctance, Jessamine stepped back. Good night, Quentin, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sleep well. Good night, Jessamine, he replied, watching as she ascended the stairs to her room, her slender figure disappearing around the corner of the landing. Later, as he lay in his own room staring at the ceiling, Quentin's thoughts were not of the coming confrontation with the Blackburn Gang, but of Jessamine Reed and the unexpected future that had begun to take shape in his mind, a future that, for the first time since Will's death, held the promise of happiness. The next 3 days passed in a state of tense anticipation. Marshal Reeves discreetly recruited 4 reliable men to assist in their plan, while Quentin and Jessamine maintained a low profile, avoiding the saloons and spending most of their time in the hotel or taking short rides in the surrounding countryside. During these quiet moments together, their connection deepened. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Quentin found himself opening up to Jessamine in ways he never had with anyone else, not even his brother. There was something about her quiet strength and compassion that made it easy to lower his guard. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat on the hotel's small veranda watching the sunset, Jessamine broached a subject they had both been avoiding. Have you thought about what happens after? If our plan succeeds and the Blackburn Gang is brought to justice, Quentin had, in fact, been thinking of little else. I have, he admitted, and I've come to a decision. I won't be returning to Texas. She turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. You won't? No. He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. There's nothing for me there anymore. My future lies elsewhere. Where? She asked softly, though the look in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. Wherever you are, he said simply. If you'll have me. The smile that bloomed on her face was like sunrise after the darkest night. I'd have you nowhere else. They sat in companionable silence as the sun sank behind the mountains, their joined hands a promise more binding than words. The future, which had seemed so uncertain just days before, now held a clarity that filled Quentin with both peace and anticipation. That sense of peace was shattered the next morning when Marshal Reeves burst into the hotel restaurant where they were having breakfast, his expression grave. "They're here," he said without preamble, sliding into a chair at their table. "Rode in before dawn, all 6 of them, plus 2 new faces I don't recognize." Quentin felt his muscles tense. "Where are they now?" "Haynes Place. The Royal Flush, drinking and gambling like they own the town." The marshal's disgust was evident. "They'll be at it all day, most likely. These sprees of theirs usually last a couple of days at least." "So we proceed with the plan," Quentin said, meeting Jessamine's concerned gaze across the table. "Tomorrow morning you let it slip that the witness is arriving by stage the day after." Reeves nodded. "That gives us time to set up the ambush, but there's a complication now. 8 men instead of 6, worse odds than we planned for." "Can you find more help?" Jessamine asked. The marshal shook his head. "Not in time and not without risk of word getting back to them. We're stretched thin as it is." "Then we adapt," Quentin said firmly. "The plan is sound. We just need to be more careful in our execution." They spent the remainder of the day making necessary adjustments, scouting the ambush site again, and ensuring everyone involved understood their roles. By evening, everything was in place for what would happen 2 days hence. That night, Quentin found sleep elusive. He paced his hotel room, running through every detail of their plan, searching for weaknesses or oversights. A soft knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Jessamine standing there, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders over her nightdress. Her hair hung loose down her back, and in the dim lamplight she looked both vulnerable and determined. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Quentin hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety, but stepped aside to let her enter. "Is everything all right?" She moved to the center of the small room, then turned to face him. "No," she said simply. "Nothing is all right. Tomorrow we set in motion a plan that could end with either of us or both dead." "Jessamine, please let me finish," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "I've lost everyone I've ever loved. My parents, my brother. I've lived with grief for so long it became a companion. And then I met you, and for the first time I could imagine a future without that constant shadow." Quentin crossed to her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I feel the same way." "I know," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "That's why I'm here. I don't want to waste whatever time we might have. Life is too precious, too uncertain." Understanding dawned on Quentin, along with a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly took his breath away. "Are you certain?" "Your reputation means nothing compared to what I feel for you," she finished for him. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He raised a hand to her cheek, his touch reverent. "I love you, Jessamine Reed. Whatever happens, know that." "And I love you, Quentin Foster," she replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Whatever happens." When he kissed her, it was with all the longing and tenderness that had been building between them since that moment in the cemetery. And as the night deepened around them, they found in each other's arms a solace and joy that neither had dared hope for in the aftermath of their losses. Morning found them still together, Quentin watching the sunrise paint Jessamine's sleeping face with golden light. She stirred under his gaze, her eyes opening slowly, a smile spreading across her features when she saw him. "Good morning," she murmured, reaching up to touch his face as if assuring herself he was real. "Good morning," he replied, covering her hand with his own. "Any regrets?" "None," she said firmly. "You?" only that we didn't meet under different circumstances. She sat up, the sheet falling around her waist, her expression growing serious. Perhaps we needed these circumstances to find each other. Grief opened a door that might have remained closed otherwise. Quentin considered this, struck by the wisdom in her words. You may be right. Still, I wish our reunion with the men who killed our brothers didn't loom quite so large. As do I, she agreed, leaning forward to kiss him gently. But we'll face it together, and afterward. Afterward, he continued, we begin our life together if you'll marry me. Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. Are you asking? I am, he said, suddenly nervous despite the intimacy they had shared. Jessamine Reed, will you be my wife? Yes, she said without hesitation, her face radiant with joy. Yes, I will marry you, Quentin Foster. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, a vow as binding as any made before a preacher. When they finally separated, the reality of the day ahead reasserted itself. We should go, Jessamine said reluctantly. The marshal will be expecting us. They dressed quickly, Jessamine returning to her room first to avoid being seen. An hour later, they met Marshal Reeves at his office, their personal joy tempered by the gravity of what lay ahead. I've sent word to the men, Reeves informed them. They'll be ready. I'll drop the information about the witness at the Royal Flush this afternoon. If Blackburn takes the bait, they'll likely make their move tomorrow morning when the stage is due. And we'll be waiting, Quentin said, his resolve firm despite the risks. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. By nightfall, everything was in place. All that remained was to see if their trap would be sprung. Quentin and Jessamine dined quietly in the hotel restaurant that evening, their conversation deliberately light, avoiding any mention of what morning might bring. To any observer, they might have appeared to be nothing more than a couple enjoying each other's company, perhaps traveling through town on their way elsewhere. As they prepared to part for the night, maintaining appearances, despite their desire to be together, Quentin held Jessamine's hands in his expression grave. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said softly, know that meeting you has been the greatest blessing of my life. And you, mine, she replied, her eyes shining with emotion. We'll face this together and then we'll have our future. Our future, he echoed, the words a promise and a prayer. They separated reluctantly, each returning to their own room to prepare for what lay ahead. Quentin cleaned his revolver methodically, checked his rifle, and laid out his clothes for the morning. Then, with nothing left to do but wait, he knelt beside his bed. Will, he whispered, I hope you can hear me. I'm close to finding the men who took you from us. I'll make sure they face justice. But I wanted you to know, I've found something else too, someone. He smiled slightly, imagining his brother's approving nod. Her name is Jessamine, and I think you would have liked her. She's strong like you were, brave. Tomorrow could go badly, but if it does, at least I'll have known what it feels like to truly love someone. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, breaking the stillness of the night. Quentin rose, tensing instinctively. The hotel had grown quiet hours ago, most of its patrons already asleep. Another creak, closer to his door. Quentin moved silently to the side of the window, peering out cautiously. In the moonlight, he could make out several figures moving in the street below, gathering near the hotel entrance. A soft knock at his door, urgent but restrained. Quentin, Jessamine's voice came through the wood, barely audible. Quick, let me in. He opened the door swiftly, pulling her inside and closing it behind her. She was fully dressed, her face pale with alarm. They know, she said without preamble. Someone talked. They're coming for us. As if to confirm her words, the sound of heavy boots on the stairs reached them, followed by gruff voices issuing orders to check every room. The window, Quentin said, grabbing his gun, belt, and rifle. Now. They moved quickly to the window, Quentin throwing it open and looking down. A narrow ledge ran along the side of the building, ending near a drain pipe that could potentially serve as a way down to the alley below. "You first," he urged, helping Jessamine through the opening. "Stay close to the wall. I'm right behind you." She didn't argue, displaying the courage he'd come to expect from her. With remarkable agility, she maneuvered onto the ledge, inching her way toward the drain pipe. Quentin followed, his rifle slung across his back, just as the door to his room burst open behind him. A shout of alarm went up as the intruders spotted him disappearing through the window. "Move," he called to Jessamine as the sound of pursuing footsteps echoed in the room behind them. They reached the drain pipe, Jessamine descending first, her movements quick but careful. Quentin followed, the aged metal creaking ominously under their combined weight. A face appeared at the window above, and Quentin recognized the scarred man from their earlier confrontation. "They're heading for the alley," the man shouted to his companions. The drain pipe chose that moment to tear free from its moorings, sending both Quentin and Jessamine tumbling the remaining few feet to the ground. They landed hard but managed to scramble to their feet, bolting down the alley as shouts rang out behind them. "The marshal's office," Quentin panted as they ran. "It's our best chance." They wove through the darkened streets of Silver Creek, trying to avoid the main thoroughfares where they might be spotted. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew as more men joined the hunt. As they rounded a corner 2 blocks from the marshal's office, they nearly collided with 2 figures emerging from a side street. Quentin raised his revolver, then lowered it in relief as he recognized Marshal Reeves and his deputy. "This way," Reeves hissed, gesturing toward a narrow passage between buildings. "Heard the commotion and figured they'd found you." The 4 of them hurried through the passage, emerging near the livery stable behind the marshal's office. "What happened?" Quentin asked once they were safely inside the office, the doors barred behind them. "Haynes' bartender overheard me talking to one of our men," Reeves explained grimly. "Couldn't resist the reward Blackburn was offering for information. By the time I got wind of it, they were already organizing to come after you both." "So much for our ambush," Quentin said, frustration evident in his voice. "Not necessarily," the marshal countered. "They don't know that we know they're coming. We can still turn this to our advantage." "How?" Jessamine asked, her composure remarkable given their narrow escape. "By changing the battlefield," Reeves said, moving to a map of the town pinned to the wall. "They think they're hunting us, but we can reverse that if we're smart." For the next hour, they developed a new plan, one born of necessity and the element of surprise they still maintained. The marshal sent his deputy to gather their allies while they prepared the office for what was to come. By dawn, they were ready. The Blackburn Gang, frustrated by their quarry's escape during the night, had returned to the Royal Flush to regroup and plan their next move. According to the deputy's sources, they intended to search the town systematically, once daylight provided better visibility. "They'll come here eventually," Reeves said, checking his shotgun one final time. "And when they do, our men will be in position to flank them." Quentin nodded, his mind racing through the details of their hastily assembled plan. It was risky, perhaps even more so than their original ambush, but it was their best hope now. Jessamine moved to his side, her own revolver borrowed from the marshal's collection held with surprising confidence. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. "As ready as I can be," he replied honestly. "Are you sure you won't reconsider taking cover in the back room?" She gave him a look that needed no verbal response, and he couldn't help but smile despite the danger they faced. "I had to ask," he said. "I know." She reached up to touch his face briefly. "Together, remember." "Together," he agreed, his heart swelling with love for this remarkable woman. The wait was shorter than they had anticipated. Just after 8 o'clock, a commotion in the street announced the arrival of the Blackburn Gang. From their positions at the windows, they could see Ezekiel Blackburn himself at the head of the group, his silver pistols gleaming in the morning sun. "That's him," Quentin said, his voice tight with emotion. "The one in the black coat with the silver guns." Jessamine's face hardened as she looked at the man responsible for her brother's death. "He looks so ordinary," she said, sounding almost disappointed. "Most killers do," Reeves observed grimly. "It's what's inside that makes them monsters." They watched as Blackburn deployed his men, surrounding the marshal's office with a tactical precision that spoke of military training. The scarred man from earlier approached the door, while others took positions covering every potential exit. "Marshal Reeves." Blackburn called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "We know you're in there. Send out the strangers and we'll leave you be." Reeves exchanged a glance with Quentin, then responded, "Can't do that, Blackburn. They're under my protection." "Then you'll die with them." The outlaw leader shouted back. "Last chance, Marshal." "Go to hell, Blackburn," Reeves replied, signaling to his deputy who was positioned at a side window. The deputy fired a single shot into the air, the signal for their allies to move into position. Momentary confusion rippled through the outlaws at the unexpected gunshot. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, as the townsmen they had recruited opened fire from concealed positions around the square. 2 of Blackburn's men fell immediately, caught in the crossfire before they could take cover. Blackburn himself dove behind a water trough, returning fire with his ornate pistols. The remaining outlaws scattered, seeking shelter and returning fire where they could. Inside the marshal's office, Quentin, Jessamine, Reeves, and the deputy added their own guns to the fray, firing carefully from the windows to avoid exposing themselves to return fire. For several minutes, the battle raged, the sound of gunshots echoing through the town. Townsfolk not involved in the fight took cover in surrounding buildings, peering fearfully from windows at the violent scene unfolding in their usually peaceful main street. Gradually, the tide began to turn. Another of Blackburn's men fell, clutching a wound to his chest. Then another was hit in the leg, his cries of pain adding to the cacophony of battle. "We've got them on the run," the deputy shouted excitedly, but victory came at a cost. One of their allies, a shopkeeper who had lost his son to the Blackburn Gang's violence, lay motionless in the street. Another was wounded, dragging himself to safety behind a stack of crates. Amidst the confusion, Quentin lost sight of Blackburn. "Where's he gone?" he called out, scanning the street frantically. "Back door." Marshal Reeves suddenly yelled, whirling around just as the office's rear entrance splintered under the force of a powerful kick. Ezekiel Blackburn burst through, both silver pistols raised and a look of cold fury on his face. He fired twice, the shots deafeningly loud in the confined space. Marshal Reeves staggered backward, blood blooming on his shirt. The deputy returned fire but missed, the bullet embedding itself in the doorframe as Blackburn ducked aside. Quentin pushed Jessamine toward the relative safety of the marshal's desk, then faced the outlaw leader, his own revolver steady in his hand. "Drop the guns, Blackburn. It's over," Blackburn laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Nothing's over till I say it is, boy." He raised his pistols again, but before he could fire, another shot rang out from behind the desk. Jessamine had fired through a gap in the furniture, the bullet catching Blackburn in the side. The outlaw leader howled in pain and anger, staggering slightly but maintaining his footing. His guns swung toward Jessamine's position, hatred blazing in his eyes. Quentin didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times in rapid succession, each bullet finding its mark in Blackburn's chest. The outlaw's expression changed from rage to shock as he looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his shirt. "You," he began, but never finished the thought. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor, the silver pistols falling from lifeless fingers. Outside, the remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall and recognizing the hopelessness of their situation, began to surrender. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands, surrounded by the armed townspeople who had finally found the courage to stand against them. Inside the marshal's office, Quentin rushed to Reeves' side. The lawman was alive but badly wounded, blood seeping through his fingers as he pressed them against the gunshot wounds in his chest. "Get the doctor," Quentin shouted to the deputy, who nodded and dashed out the door. Jessamine knelt beside the fallen marshal, her hands replacing his to apply pressure to the wounds. "Stay with us, Marshal," she urged. "Help is coming." Reeves managed a pained smile. "Did we get him?" "We got him," Quentin confirmed. "And his men are surrendering. It's over." "Good," the marshal whispered, his eyes beginning to close. "That's good." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The town doctor arrived to tend to Reeves and the other wounded, while the surviving members of the Blackburn Gang were locked in the jail cells beneath the marshal's office. The dead 4 outlaws, including Blackburn, and 1 townsman were laid out in the undertaker's parlor. By evening, a semblance of calm had returned to Silver Creek. Marshal Reeves, though seriously wounded, was expected to recover. The deputy had assumed temporary command of law enforcement in the town, with Quentin's assistance. When they finally had a moment to themselves, Quentin found Jessamine sitting on a bench outside the doctor's office, her face pale with exhaustion but her eyes clear. "It's really over," she said as he sat beside her. "I still can't quite believe it." "Neither can I," he admitted, taking her hand in his. "When I saw Blackburn aim at you, I've never been so scared in my life." "I know the feeling," she replied, squeezing his hand. "But we survived, we both did." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the reality of what they had accomplished sink in. Justice had been served. Their brother's killers would never harm anyone again. "What now?" Jessamine finally asked, turning to look at him. Quentin smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Now we begin that future we talked about, if you're still willing." "More than willing," she assured him, returning his smile. "Though perhaps we should wait until things settle down here before we move on." He nodded in agreement. "The deputy could use our help until the marshal's back on his feet, and there's the matter of our testimony at the trial for the surviving gang members." "And then," she prompted. "And then," he said, his voice warm with promise, "we find a place to call our own. Maybe here, maybe elsewhere. Wherever we decide." "Together," she said, the word both question and statement. "Together," he confirmed, leaning in to seal the promise with a kiss. 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Quentin Foster stood once again at his brother's grave in the cemetery outside Redemption Springs. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Jessamine, now his wife of 2 weeks, her hand clasped firmly in his. "I still talk to him sometimes," Quentin admitted, looking down at the simple headstone that had replaced the wooden cross. "Especially when I need advice." Jessamine smiled, understanding in her eyes. "I talk to James too. I think they'd be pleased, don't you, that we found each other because of them in a way." "I do," Quentin agreed, pulling her closer to his side as a chilly breeze swept through the cemetery. "Will always did say everything happens for a reason, even the bad things." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, paying their respects to the brothers they had lost and acknowledging the unexpected gift they had found in each other. "Ready?" Quentin asked eventually, nodding toward the waiting horses. Their new home awaited them, a small ranch they had purchased just outside Silver Creek, where Marshal Reeves, now fully recovered, had offered Quentin a position as deputy. Jessamine would continue teaching at the local school, her natural talents with children making her a beloved figure in the community already. "Ready," she confirmed, but then paused, kneeling to place a small bouquet of winter flowers on James's grave. "Goodbye, brother," she whispered. "I'm happy now. I hope you can see that." As they walked back toward their horses, Quentin glanced over his shoulder at the two graves, side by side just as he and Jessamine now were. He thought he felt a moment of perfect peace, as if the brothers they had lost were somehow giving their blessing. "You know," Jessamine said thoughtfully as they mounted their horses, "we never did finish that conversation we started the first day we met." "Which one?" Quentin asked, adjusting his hat against the winter sun. "About whether finding justice would fill that hollow place inside," she reminded him. "I think I know the answer now." "Do you?" he asked, though her smile told him she had found the same truth he had. "Justice didn't fill it," she said simply. "Love did." Quentin reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "You're a wise woman, Jessamine Foster. And you're a fortunate man to have realized it," she teased, the light in her eyes warming him more effectively than the winter sun. "That I am," he agreed wholeheartedly. "That I surely am." As they rode away from the cemetery, leaving behind the grief that had brought them together, Quentin felt a profound gratitude. Their quest for justice had led them not only to the men who had killed their brothers but to each other, to a love that had indeed filled the hollow places in their souls, and promised a future brighter than either could have imagined in the dark days following their losses. The path ahead might hold challenges yet unknown, but they would face them as they had faced everything since that fateful day in the cemetery. Together, their strength multiplied by the love they had found in the midst of sorrow. And somewhere, Quentin thought, Will and James were smiling down on them, perhaps sharing a heavenly conversation of their own about the unexpected ways God answered prayers, even those whispered at a graveside by a grieving cowboy on an autumn evening. 5 years later, the small ranch outside Silver Creek had grown into a prosperous homestead. The 2-room cabin had expanded to a proper house with a wide front porch, where Quentin now sat watching the sunset, a small girl of about 4 with her mother's dark hair, and his own blue eyes playing at his feet with wooden animals he had carved for her. "Papa," the child said, holding up a carefully crafted horse, "will you teach me to ride a real one soon?" Quentin smiled down at his daughter, named Willow in honor of his brother Will and Jessamine's brother James. "When you're a bit bigger, little one." "Your mama would have my hide if I put you on a horse alone just yet." "But I'm big now," Willow protested with the earnest conviction only a child could muster. "You certainly are," came Jessamine's voice as she stepped onto the porch, a bundle cradled in her arms. "But even big girls need to grow a little more before they ride alone." She joined them on the porch swing, settling next to Quentin with their 3-month-old son, Thomas, named after Marshal Reeves, who had become a dear friend and Willow's honorary grandfather. "How's he been?" Quentin asked, slipping an arm around his wife's shoulders and peering down at their sleeping son. "Perfect," Jessamine replied with a tired but content smile. "Though I suspect he'll be wanting to eat again soon." Willow abandoned her toys to climb onto the swing beside her mother, peering curiously at her baby brother. "Was I that small, Mama?" "Even smaller," Jessamine told her, dropping a kiss on the child's head. "But you grew strong and beautiful, just as Thomas will." Quentin watched his family, a sense of profound gratitude washing over him. The road that had led them here had been marked with loss and pain, but had culminated in a joy deeper than he had ever thought possible. His position as deputy had evolved into that of town marshal 2 years prior, when Reeves had retired, passing the badge to Quentin with pride. Jessamine had continued teaching until Willow's birth, and now divided her time between their children and occasional substitute teaching when needed. Silver Creek had grown as well, the lawlessness of the Blackburn days replaced by a community built on mutual respect and cooperation. Many of the men who had stood with them against the outlaw gang had become close friends, regular visitors to the Foster Ranch for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. "Penny for your thoughts," Jessamine said softly, noticing his contemplative expression. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, giving her shoulders a gentle squeeze. "They're too numerous to name," she smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking earlier today about that first time we met, in the cemetery. You startled me," he recalled with a chuckle. "Standing there like a vision in the sunset. And you looked so lost," she said, her expression softening at the memory. "I never could have imagined then what would come of that moment." "God works in mysterious ways," Quentin said, echoing a phrase his mother had often used. "Brings light from darkness, joy from sorrow, love from loss," Jessamine added, completing the thought. Willow, bored with the adults reminiscing, returned to her toys on the porch floor. Thomas stirred in his mother's arms, small fists waving as he began to wake. "I'll take him," Quentin offered, carefully accepting the bundle from Jessamine. "You rest a bit." As he cradled his son, Quentin felt a familiar sense of wonder at how completely his life had transformed. The hollow place that had once seemed unfillable was now overflowing with love and purpose. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Quentin and Jessamine stood on the porch under a canopy of stars. The vastness of the night sky had always made Quentin feel small, but tonight, with Jessamine's hand in his, he felt connected to something greater than himself. "I still talk to them sometimes," Jessamine admitted, her gaze lifted to the heavens. "James and your Will. Telling them about the children, about our life here." "So do I," Quentin confessed. "Especially when I'm making a difficult decision or facing a challenge, I find myself wondering what Will would advise." "And do you hear answers?" she asked curiously. He considered the question for a moment. "Not in words," he said finally. "But sometimes in that moment of quiet after I've spoken, I feel a sense of clarity, a knowing of what's right." Jessamine nodded in understanding. "For me, it's a feeling of peace, as if James is saying, 'You're on the right path, little sister.'" They stood in comfortable silence, the connection between them as strong as ever after 5 years of marriage. The hardships they had faced, from the fight against the Blackburn Gang to the challenges of building their ranch and raising their family, had only strengthened the bond forged in shared grief and blossomed in shared love. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Jessamine asked, her voice soft in the night. "If they hadn't died, sometimes," Quentin admitted. "I might still be working cattle in Texas. You'd still be teaching in Redemption Springs. And we might never have met," she concluded, tightening her grip on his hand. "I can't imagine that world," he said honestly. "A world where I don't know you, don't love you, don't have Willow and Thomas." "Nor can I," she agreed, "which makes me think that perhaps they're not really gone, not completely. They live on in the love they made possible between us, in our children, in the good we try to do in their memory." Quentin pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "You know, for a schoolteacher, you have the soul of a poet, Mrs. Foster." She laughed softly, the sound as enchanting to him now as it had been the first time he heard it. "And you, Marshal Foster, have the heart of one." As they stood together under the vast Colorado sky, Quentin reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a quest for vengeance had transformed into something far more meaningful. A life built on love, family, and the determination to honor their brother's memories by living fully and loving deeply. The hollow place that grief had carved within them had become a space filled with joy, with the laughter of their children, with the quiet contentment of evenings like this one. Justice had been served, but it was love that had truly healed them both. And though he could no longer kneel at Will's grave to speak to his brother, Quentin knew that wherever Will was, he could see the happiness that had grown from the seeds of sorrow. Just as he knew that James could see how his sister had found not just purpose in continuing his work, but a family to call her own. "We should go in," Jessamine said eventually, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "It'll be dawn before we know it, and those children of yours rise with the sun." "Those children of mine?" Quentin questioned with a raised eyebrow and a smile. "I seem to recall you had something to do with their existence as well, Mrs. Foster." She laughed again, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. "A fair point, husband. Our children, then." "Our children," he agreed, the simple phrase encompassing all the joy and wonder of the life they had built together. "Our home, our future." "Our love," she added, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. As they walked hand in hand back into the house that had become their haven, Quentin sent a silent thanks to the brothers whose deaths had set them on this path. Though the price had been steep, the reward this life, this love was beyond measure. And somewhere in the vastness of heaven, he was certain, Will and James were smiling down on them, pleased with the healing their siblings had found in each other's arms and the legacy of love that continued to grow from the seeds of their sacrifice. For in the end, that was the greatest justice of all, not merely punishment for those who had done wrong, but the triumph of love over loss, of life over death, of hope over despair. And in that triumph, Quentin and Jessamine had found not only each other, but the peace they had both sought since that first meeting in a cemetery at sunset, when a grieving cowboy prayed at his brother's grave, and a woman whispered that he wasn't the only one talking to heaven.